The porch light caught the mark on her neck before she'd even gotten the front door shut behind her. My name is Ayden. I was standing in the kitchen at 1:40 in the morning on New Year's Day, still in the button-down I'd worn to a party I'd left 2 hours earlier than my wife had, holding a glass of water I hadn't taken a single sip from, when Vanessa stumbled through the door smelling like champagne and someone else's cologne. She was laughing at something on her phone, thumbs still moving, before she even looked up and saw me standing there. "Oh, hey," she said, like she was surprised to find her own husband in her own kitchen. "You left early." I said I would. "Midnight came and went and you weren't answering texts." I kept my voice level. 7 years of marriage teaches you what your own voice sounds like when it's trying too hard to stay calm. I was dancing. You know how loud it gets. She set her phone face down on the counter, a small motion I registered without understanding yet why it mattered, and reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. That's when I saw it. Just below her jaw, on the side of her neck she'd been keeping angled away from the light, a bruise, dark and unmistakable, the kind that doesn't come from bumping into a doorframe. "What is that?" I said. Her hand went up automatically, covering it before she'd even processed what I was pointing at. "It's nothing. Someone's elbow, probably, on the dance floor. It was packed in there." "Vanessa. I'm serious, Ayden, I don't even know how it happened. People were everywhere." She was already moving past me toward the stairs, unwinding her scarf, not meeting my eyes. "I'm exhausted. Can we not do this at 2 in the morning?" I didn't follow her up right away. I stood in that kitchen a long time, replaying the shape of the mark on her neck, the exact size and placement of it, understanding with a kind of quiet dread that no elbow on a dance floor leaves a hickey. I want to back up for a second, because you should probably know who I was before that night, not the man standing frozen in his own kitchen, but the one who'd spent 7 years assuming his marriage was simply what a good marriage looked like. I worked in commercial insurance, the kind of steady job that pays the mortgage and doesn't ask much of your imagination. Vanessa worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm downtown, under a director named Marcus who she mentioned constantly and casually, the way you mention someone who's simply part of the furniture of your working life. I'd never once suspected Marcus of anything. That's the part one still have trouble forgiving myself for. Upstairs, I found her already changed into pajamas, sitting on the edge of the bed scrolling through her phone with the kind of concentrated attention people usually reserve for something they don't want interrupted. "Who are you texting?" I asked. "Nicole. Just recapping the party." She didn't look up. I sat down on my side of the bed and said nothing for a while. Vanessa eventually set the phone down, screen dark, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, not guilt exactly, something closer to irritation that I was still awake, still thinking about this. "You're being paranoid," she said. "It was a work party. Marcus brought half his team. People get physical when they're dancing. That's all this is." I didn't say anything about Marcus. For half a second, something flickered behind her eyes, quick enough that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. "I know you didn't. I'm just saying. In case that's where your head is going." I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there next to her, listening to her breathing even out into something that sounded genuinely peaceful, and I understood, somewhere underneath the exhaustion, that whatever answer I eventually found to the question of that mark on her neck, it wasn't going to be one I could unknow once I had it. I didn't say anything else about it that week. That was the first mistake, not the last one, but the first, and it would be almost 3 months before I understood exactly how much that silence had cost me. Life resumed its normal shape faster than I expected, which in hindsight should have bothered me more than it did. Vanessa went back to work the following Monday, still talking about Marcus in that easy, offhand way, a comment he'd made in a meeting, a deadline he'd pushed, nothing that sounded like anything. I told myself the Hickey had a boring explanation I simply hadn't found yet. That's what denial does. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly rearranges the evidence into something more bearable. 2 weeks in, I noticed Vanessa had started keeping her phone face down on every surface she set it on, the kitchen counter, the nightstand, the arm of the couch. I mentioned it once, lightly, as a joke. "You've gotten protective of that thing," I said. "Force of habit," she said, without looking up from it. "Work stuff. Nothing exciting." I let it go. That was the second mistake. Her hours started shifting. She'd mentioned before that Marcus liked keeping the team late during big campaign pushes, and there was, apparently, always a big campaign push. She came home later 3 nights that week, twice smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, something heavier, more expensive than what she usually wore. "New perfume at the office," she said, when I finally asked. Someone was testing samples. "It gets on everything." I didn't push. I told myself I was being the kind of husband who trusted his wife, and there's a particular comfort in believing that about yourself, even when the evidence quietly disagrees. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever caught yourself explaining away a detail that didn't actually need explaining, building the excuse for someone before they even had to ask you to, you already know exactly the position I was in that month. My friend Nicole, no relation to the Nicole Vanessa mentioned texting, a work friend of mine from a previous job, came over for dinner with her husband in late January, and at one point in the kitchen, alone, she asked me quietly if everything was all right. "You seem distracted lately," she said. "Is it Vanessa?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Something's been off since New Year's. I can't put my finger on it." "The Hickey thing?" Nicole raised an eyebrow. "Vanessa told my husband's coworker some story about a dance floor elbow. Didn't sound like she was totally sure of the story herself, if you know what I mean. That detail stayed with me longer than I expected it to, not the story itself, but the fact that Vanessa had apparently told a version of it to someone else, someone outside our house, unprompted. You don't pre-explain something that genuinely doesn't need explaining." In February, Vanessa came home with a new bracelet, gold, simple but clearly not cheap. "Bought it myself," she said, before I'd even asked. "End of quarter bonus. Figured I deserved something." I complimented it. I didn't ask to see a receipt, didn't check our joint account that week, told myself that questioning a bracelet was the kind of small, ugly suspicion that ruins good marriages. I understand now that ignoring it wasn't generosity. It was fear dressed up as trust. Looking back now, that bracelet is one of the moments I keep returning to, not because it was damning on its own, but because I had every opportunity right then to simply look at our bank statement, and I chose not to, because some part of me already suspected what I'd find. By late February, the pattern had become impossible to fully ignore even while I was actively trying to. Late nights, 3 or 4 times a week now. The phone, always face down, always angled slightly away from me on the nightstand. A new habit of stepping onto the back porch to take calls she said were from her sister. One night I picked up her phone off the counter, just to move it so I could set down a plate, and it lit up with a notification, a name I didn't recognize, a message preview cut off mid-sentence, "Can't stop thinking about Friday." I set the phone back down exactly where it had been. I didn't open it. I told myself I hadn't actually seen anything incriminating, that Friday could mean anything, that I was building a case out of fragments because I'd let one Hickey turn into a season of suspicion. I didn't mention the message to Vanessa. I didn't mention it to anyone. I sat with it alone for 4 days, turning it over, before I finally decided I needed more than fragments, I needed to actually know. I didn't understand yet how much more there was to know, or how far back it actually went. That message on the counter wasn't the beginning of anything. It was just the first piece I'd actually let myself see. I called Nicole first, the friend who'd flagged the dance floor story back in January, and asked her, carefully, if she'd heard anything more specific through the grapevine. "I don't want to start something that isn't true," she said, "but my husband's coworker mentioned Vanessa and Marcus have been seen at that wine bar on 5th a few times. Just the 2 of them. Could be work. People do work dinners." "Could be," I said, though something in my chest had already stopped believing that possibility. I started paying closer attention after that call, not confronting, just watching, the way you watch weather building on a horizon you can't yet see clearly. Vanessa's behavior over the following 2 weeks escalated in ways that, taken individually, could all still be explained away, but together started forming a shape I couldn't unsee. She flinched, actually flinched, when I walked into the bedroom unannounced while she was on a call, quickly saying, "Let me call you back," to whoever was on the line before I'd even said anything. "Who was that?" I asked. "Work," she said, too fast, already busying her hands with something on the dresser that didn't need doing. A week later, I noticed she'd started using a different bank card for smaller purchases, not our joint account, a personal one I hadn't paid much attention to before. When I asked about a grocery run that seemed disproportionately expensive for what was actually in the fridge, she waved it off. "Prices are insane right now. You know that." I did know that. I also knew, somewhere underneath the explanation I was accepting, that something didn't add up, and I still didn't push. I didn't ask. Not because I didn't want to know. I was afraid of exactly what I'd find, and some part of me understood that once I knew for certain, I couldn't go back to not knowing. The clearest sign came at the end of February, on a night Vanessa said she was staying late for a mandatory work dinner. I drove past her office on my way home from a late meeting of my own and saw her car in the lot of a restaurant 3 blocks away, not the wine bar Nicole had mentioned, a quieter place, tucked behind a strip mall. I didn't go in. I sat in my car across the street for almost 20 minutes, engine off, watching the door, and I never saw her come out, because I eventually made myself drive away before I did something I couldn't take back in a parking lot. When she got home 2 hours later than she'd said she would, I asked how the work dinner went. Long Marcus wanted to go over the whole campaign timeline again. You know how he gets before a launch. I said nothing about the restaurant. I told myself I needed more than a parked car to justify what I was starting to feel, a slow, cold certainty settling into my chest that had nothing left to do with Hickey's or perfume or bracelets, and everything to do with a pattern I could no longer pretend not to see. That week, I quietly opened a new email account and started saving screenshots, the message I'd seen weeks earlier, dates and times of her late nights, the receipt for the bracelet I finally looked up in our account history, which showed a charge from a jewelry store 3 towns over, nowhere near her office. I hadn't told anyone what I was doing. Not Nicole, not my brother, not a single person who might have talked me into confronting Vanessa before I was ready. I understood, somewhere in that quiet, methodical process of collecting fragments, that I wasn't going to get anywhere by asking her directly. She'd had an explanation for everything so far, each one delivered fast enough and calmly enough that I'd almost believed it in the moment, every single time. I realized something uncomfortable that week, sitting alone with a folder of screenshots on my laptop, that I wasn't afraid of losing Vanessa anymore. I was afraid of confirming that the version of my marriage I'd believed in for 7 years had never actually existed. I didn't know it yet, but the folder I'd started that week was about to become a great deal larger, and much heavier, than I could have imagined sitting in my car outside that restaurant. I hired Sam the 2nd week of March. I found him through a coworker who'd used a private investigator during a messy business dispute, and when I called, I gave him the barest outline, dates, the restaurant, the bracelet, the message I'd seen on her phone. Sam was a quiet, unhurried man in his 50s who didn't ask me how I felt about any of it, which I appreciated more than I expected to. "Give me 3 weeks," he said. "I'll tell you exactly what's happening, and I won't sugarcoat it." While Sam worked, I started quietly reviewing our joint finances more thoroughly than I ever had, and what I found made my hands go cold at the kitchen table one Tuesday night while Vanessa was out at another work dinner. A transfer to a personal savings account I hadn't known she'd opened. A recurring charge to a hotel chain, always on nights she'd told me she was working late. A jewelry purchase far larger than the bracelet, a watch, nearly $6,000, that I'd certainly never seen her wear. The total, once I added it up across 4 months, came to just over $11,000 I could directly trace. Sam's eventual report would show it went much further than that. "Nicole, my friend, checked in with me weekly during this stretch, and I finally told her what I was doing. "You're not overreacting," she said, when I described the hotel charges. "I wish I could tell you that you were." Sam's first update came 10 days in. He'd followed Vanessa on 2 separate evenings. Both nights she'd told me were work dinners, and both times she'd met Marcus at a hotel 2 exits off the highway, arriving separately, leaving separately, staying roughly 2 hours each time. "There's something else," Sam told me over the phone, his voice carefully neutral. "There's a second man. Different hotel, different night. Goes by Trevor. I don't have a read yet on how long that one's been going, but it's not new." I sat with that information for a long time after we hung up. Not just Marcus. Not just one betrayal I might have eventually found some way to metabolize. 2. Something tightened in my chest that I hadn't expected, not surprise exactly, because some part of me had stopped being surprised weeks earlier, but a kind of exhausted recognition, like watching a building you already knew was unstable finally start to visibly crack. The subplot with Marcus's own life started intersecting with mine around this time, in a way I hadn't anticipated. Marcus's wife, Renee, reached out to me directly. She'd found messages on his phone by accident, a name she didn't recognize that turned out to be Vanessa's, and she wanted to know if I already knew. "I've suspected something for months," Renee told me over coffee, her voice steady but her hands not quite matching it. "I found hotel confirmations under his email. I didn't know whose wife it was until I saw a photo. We compared notes carefully, cautiously, 2 strangers assembling the same fractured timeline from opposite ends. Renee's information about specific dates matched almost exactly with what Sam had already found, and more importantly, she had access to messages between Marcus and Vanessa that made the financial picture even clearer. Vanessa had, on at least 2 occasions, used money from what I now understood was our shared savings account to cover a hotel bill when Marcus's card had been declined. I contacted a lawyer, Patricia, the same week, mostly to understand my legal footing before I did anything else. She was blunt in a way I found strangely comforting. "Document everything," she said. "Don't confront her yet. The moment you confront her, she has time to hide assets, delete messages, build a counter-narrative. Let Sam finish. Let me see the full financial picture. Then we move, deliberately, all at once." I didn't know it yet, sitting in Patricia's office with a growing folder of receipts and screenshots, but the total dollar figure Sam would eventually hand me, the number that would finally make the full scope of what Vanessa had done impossible to minimize, was still 3 weeks away from landing on my desk, and it was going to be far larger than the 11,000 I'd already traced myself. Sam's final report came in on the first Friday of April. 42 pages, timestamps, photographs, financial reconciliations. The total, once everything was accounted for, hotels, gifts, a weekend trip to Denver Vanessa had told me was a girls' trip with coworkers, a leased car payment made quietly from a joint line of credit I hadn't checked in months, came to just over $47,000. I sat with that number for a long time before I called Patricia. "We're ready," she said. Confront her calmly. Don't raise your voice. Let the paperwork do the talking. And Ayden, record the conversation if your state allows it. Yours does. I asked Vanessa to sit down at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening, the same table where all of this had quietly started 4 months earlier. I set the folder down between us, unopened, the way she'd once set an envelope in front of me, except this time, I was the one holding the evidence. "We need to talk," I said. "About Marcus. About Trevor. About $47,000. Vanessa's face went through several expressions in quick succession, confusion first, genuine or performed I couldn't tell, then something harder settling into place. "I don't know what you think you know," she said, "but you're way off base. I have hotel records, Vanessa. I have bank statements. I have a private investigator's report with photographs. Don't do this." She laughed, short and sharp, an ugly sound I'd never heard from her before. "You hired someone to follow me? That's insane. That's actually insane, Ayden. Is it insane, or is it accurate? You're being paranoid and controlling, and honestly, this explains a lot about why things have felt so tense lately. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with tracking my every move, I wouldn't need space. I opened the folder and slid the first page toward her, a photograph, time-stamped, of her and Marcus outside the hotel 2 exits off the highway. She went quiet for a moment, staring at it, and then something in her posture shifted, the mockery draining out, something more defensive and cornered replacing it. That doesn't prove anything happened inside, she said, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. There's 40 more pages, Vanessa. Trevor's in there too. And the money. 11,000 from checking, 22 more I traced through the joint credit line, a leased car I didn't know existed. Her hands were shaking now, and for a moment I watched something in her genuinely crack. You don't understand what it's been like, she said, her voice suddenly smaller. Ayden, I need you to understand. Then explain it to me. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the folder, and when she finally spoke again, something in her had shifted from defense into something raw. She finally spoke. This is what she told me. It started with Marcus, back in the fall, after a stretch where everything at home felt so quiet and settled it started to feel like nothing at all. He noticed things about me nobody else seemed to notice anymore, the way I'd shrink a little in meetings, the way I second-guessed myself. That first night at the hotel, I told myself it was just once, that it didn't have to mean anything about us. I told myself that as long as I never let it touch home, it wasn't really a betrayal, just something separate, something mine. Once it started, stopping felt harder than continuing. Every time I told myself it was the last time, and every time there was a reason it wasn't. Trevor happened almost by accident, at a conference, and I told myself that one didn't count either, because none of it was supposed to count if I never let you see it. I was terrified constantly, of being caught, obviously, but more than that, of who I'd apparently become without noticing. I stopped being able to look at our wedding photo on the hallway wall. I'd walk past it every morning and just look at the floor instead. I tried to stop after the New Year's party, after you saw the mark on my neck. I told myself that was my warning, my chance to end it clean. I didn't take it. I don't have a good reason why. I just didn't. That's what she told me. I sat across from her at our kitchen table and felt something I hadn't expected, not relief, not forgiveness, just a strange, heavy clarity, like finally setting down something I'd been carrying without realizing how much it weighed. It's over, I said quietly, once she'd finished. I need you to hear that clearly. It's over, Vanessa. She reached for my hand across the table, and I pulled it back before she could take it. Please, she said, we can fix this, I'll do whatever. I already talked to a lawyer. Patricia's filing Monday. I'm not doing this out of anger, Vanessa. I'm doing it because I finally understand what I've actually been living inside of. I didn't know it yet, standing up from that table and walking out to my car, but Vanessa's attempts to fight back, legally, emotionally, financially, were only just beginning, and the next several weeks would test exactly how much of my newfound calm could actually survive contact with her desperation. The divorce proceedings took 4 months, and Vanessa fought harder than I expected, not to save the marriage, not really, but to protect what remained of her finances and her version of events. Patricia was ready for every move. Vanessa's lawyer tried to argue that the private investigation had been an invasion of privacy, that the evidence should be inadmissible. Patricia calmly produced the financial reconciliations, the joint account statements, the leased car payment, none of which required Sam's surveillance to prove, since it was our shared money, moved without my knowledge or consent. Marcus lost his job within weeks of Renee filing for divorce herself, once the affair became impossible for his company to quietly ignore. A complaint from Renee's lawyer regarding company funds Marcus had used to cover hotel expenses landed him in front of HR before landing him out the door entirely. Trevor, as it turned out, disappeared from the narrative almost entirely once his own involvement became public. I never learned much more about him beyond his name and a handful of hotel timestamps, and honestly, I stopped caring to. Vanessa called me repeatedly in the weeks after the confrontation, sometimes tearful, sometimes angry, twice threatening to contest the divorce entirely out of what felt more like spite than genuine hope for reconciliation. I let Patricia handle every one of those calls after the third attempt. "I don't understand how you can just be done," Vanessa said, during the one phone call I did answer, near the end of the process. 7 years, Ayden. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It means I spent 7 years believing something that wasn't real for at least the last several months of it, I said. I'm not interested in punishing you forever, Vanessa. I'm interested in never doing this again. The settlement gave me the house, the bulk of our remaining joint assets, and full reimbursement for the $47,000 Sam's investigation had traced, money Vanessa's own family eventually helped cover, once it became clear fighting it further would only cost her more in legal fees. I understand something now that I didn't during those months of watching, waiting, collecting evidence like a man building a case against his own life, that the folder full of screenshots and hotel receipts was never really the hard part. The hard part was admitting to myself, sitting in that car outside a restaurant in February, that I already knew. Renee and I still talk occasionally, an odd kind of camaraderie built entirely out of shared damage. She's doing well, rebuilding a life of her own on the other side of Marcus's collapse, and there's something quietly reassuring in watching someone else walk the same path a few steps ahead of you and come out the other side intact. I moved into a smaller place across town that spring, smaller, quieter, entirely mine. I took up woodworking, of all things, something I'd never had patience for before, and found there was a specific piece in it, sanding something down to its honest shape, no shortcuts, no hidden layers underneath the surface. Nicole asked me recently if I'd ever consider dating again. Eventually, I told her. Not because I need someone else to feel complete. Just because I finally trust myself again to know the difference between a good sign and a warning one.